Tonight we're going to head into the Peavey custom shop world with a very special Eddie Van Halen Wolfgang model. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Everyone say thank you, David, for using my forwarding service so we can check out this very interesting Wolfgang. So, I have seen these things around. I've never actually held one in the flesh, let alone a custom shop crazy paint job one. But I'm going to do my best with the knowledge that David was able to bestow upon me to talk about this model today. Because if you're a Peavey guy, apparently this is a rare find from 2003. It was custom ordered, left in the box, essentially new old stock. So we got all the original stuff here. But before we get too far into it, I just want to get my first impressions here. This is way chunkier than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be like super slim. It really is about the thickness of a Les Paul, maybe just a little bit thinner, but we'll have to measure that on the workbench. If you like Les Pauls, just looking at it on the side here is very familiar. But I really wasn't expecting it to still have the carved top. So it's familiar, but different at the same time. I will now never think of these exactly the same again. But you'll notice there's no pickup rings on this. They're just drilled directly into the body. We've got a Floyd Rose, looks like a D-Tuna. And if you happen to have missed it, we do have a single volume control here. It just blends in with our really cool Bengal Tiger. But then as far as the neck, it just feels like a nice satin finish. And you guys know how those are. If you play them at all, they will eventually buff up. So this one definitely appears to match the seller's NOS new old stock claim. But look at this headstock. I don't think I've ever noticed that before on them. They just have a little scallop out of the top. That's fun. And a matching headstock. So now let's dive into a little bit of the history of the Wolfgang model, because it's not the usual Frankenstrat that a lot of people associate with Eddie Van Halen. He's had tons of different signature guitars over the years. Starting in 1996, Eddie teams up with Peavey to develop this new model that he calls the Wolfgang. He also called his son Wolfgang. Maybe that ties back to Mozart, but his son at the time was 13 years old. And then we just recently reviewed the SA-126, which now that I've seen them both at the same time, I can kind of see how it's just taking the Wolfgang and kind of making it a semi-hollow. But I learned through the comments in that episode that he called his model the SA-126 to kind of throw some tribute back to his dad, because Eddie's birthday is January 26, 1-26. So lots of piggybacking tribute going on. I just thought that was fun. Thought I'd throw it in the episode. But this partnership was relatively short-lived, about 8 years or so. So 1996 through the end of 2004. Because it's at this time when Eddie decides he's going to join Fender. They do a few things with Charvel, with a custom art series, and then eventually they debut the EVH brand, and that's kind of where we sit today. But let's step back into the Peavey realm with what we're talking about today. This Bengal Tiger was painted by John Douglas at the new Peavey main facility in Meridian, Mississippi, because they just moved there in 2003 apparently. And if you go to his Instagram page, he actually has some photos of not only this guitar, but a few other custom exotic animal ones. And if you think that name sounds familiar, yes, that's the same John Douglas that toured with Aerosmith recently, filling in as the drummer for Joey Kramer. But out of all the Wolfgangs, apparently there were only about 450 custom shop models, and half of them were custom ordered to specs of the buyer. So you can find some pretty interesting stuff out there. You can check out Jeff's website, rockandrollweekend.com, if you want to learn more nitty-gritty detailed information. I don't need to read his website. You can go check it out yourself. He's a collector that loves these things. That catches us up a little bit on the history of this unique model, but I thought we would take some time to appreciate just the condition of this thing. It definitely has that early 2000s, late 90s typical hard shell case to it. They have that certain glue smell to them. As far as your case compartment, it's quite nice and spacious. But as far as the fit of the case, yeah, not so good. But we do have cool paperwork as well, including our original warranty sheets. Here's a look at the extended warranty. It was never filled out because this thing was never unboxed till recently. But I got a good chuckle out of this. Your date of birth. They automatically fill in the 19 for you. Because remember, this is 2004. Most 5-year-olds weren't buying guitars at that time. Can't do that now. And we can take a quick look at the other warranty page real quick. Now we got the final inspection list here. What caught my attention is the date of completion, 12/17 of 2004. You gotta remember from our history segment, this partnership only lasted till the end of 2004. So this was made within the last month of them operating under their agreement. So we can't say it's the last Peavey Wolfgang ever made, but it was definitely made towards the end of their run. Otherwise, we've got some springs, case keys, truss rod tools, wrenches, original trem arm, and plastic fret protector to aid in the shipping process, and a quite beefy owner's guide, which shows off his tattoo and talks about some of the specs and gives you some photos. So to learn more about this one, let's go ahead and throw it onto the workbench to detail some of its specs. I'm not going to fully tear this one apart because new old stock this long, we don't need to take it apart to look at the backside of the pickups when I don't really know what I'm doing with Floyd's, and it seems relatively set up still. So let's go ahead and get what we can get while being respectful to this instrument. Here's what I was able to find about the Wolfgang model. The neck pickup is upside down from tradition with the adjustable pull pieces on the bottom side rather than up here, but the bridge pickup is in its regular positioning. We already talked earlier how it doesn't have any pickup rings. They just get screwed directly into the body. Now if we go back to that photo, we can actually see the cavity routes before anything was installed. But the owner's manual just calls these two Peavey humbucking pickups custom wound to Edwards specifications, and they talk about a two-step wax dipping process to provide ultra-low noise operation and resistance to microphonic feedback. And apparently, mounting it directly to the body also reduces feedback at really high volume levels. But within the circuit, the bridge reads 13.34 k ohms, neck position 8.15, and then they play together at 5.11. But when looking this guitar over, I noticed this knob was ridiculously loose because it was obviously in some guy's collection for a while, so naturally things will loosen over time. So I tightened that knob up, but I noticed it's actually a push-pull pot, so it appears we can coil split, so the bridge becomes 6.77 k ohms. The neck is unfazed by that, so it's just a bridge coil split, which is kind of fascinating from a wiring standpoint, but we'll see more of that on the back. As far as the knob, though, looks like your typical cheapy volume knob. It's got the ridges on the side and the skirt. Nothing too fancy there. And despite the switch tip looking like it's made of black metal, it's still plastic, and this is just a pretty basic 3A toggle switch, although a bit clickier than usual. I really want to take a second just to paint the carved top with the light. I did not realize these were so heavily carved like a Les Paul. Like, in many ways, it's a little bit more dramatic, but it's like so familiar but yet foreign at the same time. If you like the idea of a Les Paul Access custom, I think you might enjoy these if you don't have to have it be so slim. And maybe there's other Wolfgang models that they do thin it out. I don't know. This is outside my wheelhouse, but I'm enjoying it. So thank you, David, for sending this thing over. Here's the dip captured on the contour gauge. So here's like the top, and then towards the ridge, it just dips down and slopes back up. And normally these actually have a beautiful figured maple top, so you could show off some of the flame and or quilt figuring and the other cool finishes. This one has the design all over it, so we don't necessarily get that, but it's certainly a striking finish. Something else that I noticed that's kind of cool about this paint job is the fact that it looks like the Bengal stripes are actually legitimately painted. Like, if you get it in the light just right, you can see the brush strokes. And there's a few areas where it goes outside the lines and there's like some lightness within it. That's kind of a cool personalized touch to it. Not just a design that was like sprayed over. But traditionally these are constructed either all basswood or it's basswood with a maple top. But now we can move on to our Floyd Rose system. So it is a bit blockier looking than usual. It's Peavey branded. However, it is officially licensed under Floyd Rose. But I learned something else about EVH. He does not want it to be set up as floating. Because when I first got this, I was like, okay, does it work, backwards and forwards? No, it's actually kind of locked in place and you have to put some decent pressure on it just to move it down. According to the owner's manual, that's how he prefers it. He locked it down to the back of the guitar for better sustain and tuning stability. Like if the string snaps or something, it's not going to throw everything out of whack. So now I'm curious. Does that actually make string changes easier? Or is it still a little bit more labor intensive than a regular stop bar tailpiece? Because in many ways, this is just like a regular Stratocaster trem at this point. But we can see the D-tuna here. So you can actually install these pretty much on any Floyd Rose as far as I understand it. But it takes you from standard tuning. And if you come over here, you can pull it out. And then it goes to drop D. So you can do all that without having to mess with your trem system's locking mechanisms, which is absolutely fantastic. But we can move on to our body, to our neck. It is constructed with a maple fretboard and a maple neck, but everything becomes a satin finish up here. And for whatever reason, Eddie liked bird's eye, apparently, so it's used on a lot of his signature models. But does anybody think these dot inlays are not centered correctly? Like, they're all just shifted a bit too far down? Suppose it could also be the bird's eye plane with our eyes. Let's grab some specs. 1.63 inch nut width. Wow. That's actually pretty skinny right there. And then 2.06 by the 12th. Yeah, sure enough. It's a little bit of a thinner neck in that aspect. I measure about 0.84 inches at the first fret neck depth and about 0.91 at the 12th. I will say the side of the neck has a really nice shoulder to it. It rounds over very quickly. So even though those numbers make it seem like a really thin shredder neck, I wouldn't necessarily classify it as that. It's a really rounded C shape, even though the neck is a bit slimmer this way. Here's a look at that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. You can definitely see what I was talking about, how there's just a little bit more shoulder here on the base side, and then it kind of carves away. So slightly asymmetrical there, but then by the 12th, it's just fully C-shaped. These have a 25.5 inch scale length, and according to the owner's manual, a 15 inch fretboard radius. The owner's manual calls these jumbo frets, and you've got 22 of them. Now, being left in that box for 20 some years, there's a little bit of fret sprout going on, but it should be easy enough to fix with a luthier, and they could probably use a polishing. But if you're wondering where the truss rod is, they actually utilize the wheel down here. But now we'll move on to our headstock. Lots of cool colors, but also tons and tons of branding. So you got the EVH Wolfgang under there, then you've got the Peavey over here. We already talked about the scallop, but in between then and there, I looked at a few other Wolfgangs. It seems like a lot of the more modern produced ones, they just cut this out rather than scalloping some of the headstock away. But what I really appreciate about this unique feature is the fact that the rest of the neck is satin, but the top is gloss. So you actually have a gloss finish over top of the scalloped portion as well. And relatively straight string pull, but that's a pretty small headstock, but certainly far from a headless guitar. As far as the dimensions of the body, it's 9.5. But I suppose if you take this into account, it's 10, and then this is 13. So that's pretty close to a Les Paul, which is 9/13, so just a little bit wider up here. But most of those are about 2 inches thick, whereas this one, yeah, 1.65 inches here. Then using my other calipers from here to the back, I measured 1.95 inches. So it's a little bit slimmer, but still very familiar to, say, a Les Paul Studio that has a slightly thinner body. In many ways, that is a very good way to describe this thing. Les Paul Studio, but just a little bit wider and double cut, offset. I have a new appreciation for these things now. As far as the backside, if you wanted to customize this, you've got so much room in here if you didn't want to just have a single volume control. You could put 4 in, add a tone, but here's a look at our stock push-pull pot. I did notice there's actually a loose wire here that doesn't ever appear to have been soldered onto anything. I'm not sure if that's intentional or it was supposed to go somewhere. Like, would this wire attached somewhere on that pot actually coil split the neck? I did a little bit of poking around to see if just touching it to an area would fix it. I didn't get results anywhere, so I'm just gonna leave it as is. But let the owner know that it is there. The guitar functions currently. Could it do more? Maybe. But I don't think I'm the right guy to go poking around with a solder iron in a 2004 new old stock Peavey. But back here, I thought this was fun. It looks like you got the signature of the builder. And again, if we go back to that photo, if we were to take the neck off, I bet that's that exact same guitar. You would see the builder's signature there as well. But here's what it looks like stock from the factory. You could add another one of these tension springs if you wanted to. It was in the case. But otherwise, that's what we've got here. I did notice a few dimples within the finish in a couple of different areas, but nothing too crazy. Looks like our neck pocket's looking good. That's always a blessing. And it is a bolt-on neck, not glued in. You've got the 4 screws right there. Just kind of blends in with our Bengal Tiger finish. And speaking of finishing, if you get it in the light just right, you can see that ridge right there underneath the paint. That's where the maple top joins onto your body. That's always cool to see. You kind of have to know to look for that though. And the output jack is a football plate. I thought the back plates were kind of cool. They round them over nicely and put shielding. And the trem cover sits proud, whereas the other ones are recessed into the body. Now we can move up the back side of the neck. Again, satin finish, perfectly maintained, and has got bird's eye figuring. But we have a branding of Eddie Van Halen's signature, as well as our patent number, and you can see our Schaller branded tuners on the back side of our headstock here, as well as our serial number 50981857. All said and done, I'm surprised. I thought this was going to weigh more than that. 8 pounds, 1.5 ounces. A lot of that weight is in the body though. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this one sounds. The neck pickup has a really interesting tone to it. Thin but juicy at the same time. Whereas the bridge pickup has much more darker tones. They blend together like so. But don't forget, we can coil split that bridge. I'm curious, is the neck pickup actually stuck in the split mode? I don't know enough about these to know, but it almost sounds like maybe, unless they have a special sauce in that thing. Now that we know all about the Peavey Wolfgang, what are my final thoughts on this? Newfound respect for this model for sure. If you're a Les Paul guy like me, I highly suggest checking one out because I think you'll find that it actually feels very familiar. It sounds great. Again, I don't know if the electronics are exactly how they're supposed to be, but that bridge pickup, you just want to stay there the entire time, so that doesn't really even matter in the long run. But that neck pickup was very nice clean, so I would definitely be interested in checking out more Wolfgangs. I'm curious to see if the other brands do them as good of a justice as this, and that oil finish neck is just really slick. I know I called it a satin finish, but it's a little bit different than that, but that's a good way to get around in your head how this neck will feel as compared to the full glossy body. And normally I don't really even like Floyd Rose equipped guitars, and I'm not going to say the tuning was perfect in this episode, but it's a little bit less temperamental due to the way that Eddie preferred to have his set up not completely floating. So definitely give one a try if you like everything a Les Paul can offer you, but you're interested in what else this can do otherwise, because it's a completely different guitar. Don't take this as Eddie Van Halen stole the Les Paul. No. It's just vaguely familiar, but a lot of fun. So David, thank you for using my forwarding service to get this guitar to you in Australia. If you're buying a brand new guitar or you need something forwarded out of the United States because the seller can't get it to you, that's what my Forwarding and New Guitar Day program is for. So feel free to check out more information on that on my website. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.